Welcome back, everybody. The next session is from Rahul Verma. I'm sure you are all aware of Rahul. He has done amazing work in the field of test automation, or automation in testing, so to say. I know Rahul from good old days when I was working back in India, was very active part of local testing community. Hello, Rahul. How are you?
Hi Lalit, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
And other than his testing work that you all must be already aware of, I would like to mention Rahul is an amazing composer. From time to time, I enjoy his poems. I don't know if your SoundCloud account is open, but for rainy day, people visit his SoundCloud profile and enjoy his beautiful composition.
Examples using Arjuna. So I typically want my presentations to be interactive, but today is possibly not the day for this because this presentation in interactive mode takes about 1.5 to 2 hours. So for any questions, you can use comment section and I would try to cater to them. And Test Tribe has, this conference has provided already a Slack channel. So any questions which are follow-up questions, I would like to tackle them on Slack. Let's get started. We already have given the subject. We are short on time. Uh, so although the presentation talks about Selenium, which has in the last about 8 to 10 years in the testing community, this presentation deals with the need for framework. Why do we go for the subject of framework? Arjuna, to introduce to you, is a framework which I have developed, open source, free for use for commercial or any free work which you're doing. And I would like to take examples using Arjuna, but it is not strictly an Arjuna presentation. I would like to keep it confined to Selenium-based discussions. I would discuss framework ideas. If you want to try out Arjuna, you can try it out. Otherwise, you can also maybe pick up some ideas from here and then try on your own. Okay. So let's get to the point. Any framework is usually bigger than the sum of its parts. Arjuna is not really a web UI test automation framework. Web UI automation is a small piece in Arjuna, so that you know. But given the presentation constraints, I've picked up one subject for today, and we would focus on building framework or features which are around web GUI automation when Selenium is the underlying engine. Yeah, let's get started. So some of you, or maybe most of you, or many of you, might have worked with Selenium as the engine to do web UI automation. The code which you see on the screen is Python-based code, and those who have Googled to get started with Selenium, because that's what we do, right? Any question we have today around code, we go to Google Mata, we put some random text there, and we get some initial answers. And those answers usually come from poor, cheap websites like Guru99 and sites like these. Very cheap code, directly maybe picked up from basic tutorial sections. And the thing in test automation or any field for that matter is it doesn't help. You can get started this way, but you can't stop here. If you really want to do professional work, you cannot stop at the first page on Google search. You have to go beyond. What you see on the screen is decent enough code written using raw Selenium. You have a typical form, you want to fill it in. There's a username field, there's a password field, you click on the login button. And to do GUI interaction, you first need to find out elements. And for that, you have to first launch the browser, you launch the service. In this case, let's say we are launching Chrome. And then you give different identifiers, could be ID, name, or whatever identifiers which Selenium provides you with. There are 8 of them. And then maybe you are going into the complex field of XPath. You do all of this for a very basic operation from end user perspective, which is entering a username, entering a password, and clicking on login. But if you stop here, this is not professional code. This is still novice code. If you really want to write professional code using Selenium, so when you see this bulky code in your work, this indicates that this is not the way to do work. When we do it professionally, we have to do better. So these are indicators which start indicating, either your manager might indicate, or it might be a self-indicator that I need to do better. But when you start doing better, the problem gets worse than what you see on the screen. Let's look at that better code and how it gets worse. Because in the previous code, you were not really polling for the elements to become available. So your script was leading to unstable code. So then you start learning about how dynamic weights work, how polling mechanisms work, you want to improve, and you start writing all this bulky code suddenly. The configuration problem is still not solved because Selenium is not going to solve your configuration problems or non-web UI automation problems. So you're still stuck. And when you start writing code of this nature, this is the point where it's a clear-cut indicator, or it establishes the fact that you need a framework. And this is the point where you have to make your choices very well, that are you going to construct your own framework, or are you going to use an existing one? In the previous choice, you of course start learning object-oriented programming, you start getting deeper, maybe you start learning or start going through training programs. And the second part is where frameworks like Arjuna, which are ready-made for the purpose and developed with years of working with frameworks, they come into picture. So you have to make your choices right at this stage. Yeah. If you don't make the choice, somebody is going to make that choice for you anyways. So this presentation is about these choices and some of the steps which you have to take when it comes to framework building. Yeah. Let's look at the first problem, which is a non-Selenium problem, but you would come across this problem when you're working on Selenium anyways. And that's the problem of configuration. I have looked at about 100 frameworks so far in my consulting work, and the typical reduction in code, which my work has seen, is ranging from 85% to 97.5%. It's a big figure to claim, I know that. But this is an indicator that 85 to 97% code which testers write is rubbish. It's not needed. They're just putting it in. They are feeling happy that they write large pieces of code. You see the size of my work? It's so big. But the problem with coding is the bigger you write, the worse it might be. So if you're writing more, maybe you don't know coding then. And that's what my assessment of frameworks usually brings to the table. And some of the problems which I face in this is related to configuration. Usually a configuration is treated like a file problem. Create a file, dump some data in it, use it in your framework, and tell to the people that you've externalized the data. You've configured your framework and clap. But configuration, if you go deeper, the moment your project needs start becoming complex, configuration problem is also a complex problem. And what I've seen in frameworks is that it is the cheapestly done feature. And so what I did in Arjuna is that I treat configuration as a tree problem. It's not a flat problem. It's a hierarchical problem to fix. And the other thing which you might want to keep in mind when building frameworks is that we are humans. Humans make mistakes. We make basic casing mistakes, underscore mistakes, dot mistakes. So when you develop a framework, give it a heart. Make it human as far as it can be. It should forgive small mistakes. Otherwise, you are in for fixing things which you don't want to really fix on a day-to-day basis. Uh, as this problem is not directly Selenium related, I would not delve into it much. But if you're building a framework, whichever tool you pick up, if you're in mobile automation, you're picking, let's say, Appian. If you're working with Java, doing web services, testing, you're picking Rest Assured. Any field of test automation you pick up, you are going to face the configuration problem. So please plan it well in your framework. That's a fundamental problem to solve in your framework. Arjuna uses YAML as the format. And in Slack, maybe we can go deeper, or you can go through Arjuna docs to find out that how this problem is really complex and what are the ideas around solving. Let's look at very basic step of around that bulky code and how do we really make it better in a framework. The first baby steps which we take. So what you see on the screen is that you have to abstract. Abstraction is a fundamental principle in coding and programming. If you separate the concept of design from coding, you would never reach a good code. So if you're building a framework yourself, please spend time on learning design. It would go a long way. And the core of design is around object-oriented programming principles. Please go through them. plan your objects properly, how they talk to each other, how they interact with each other. And you can get in touch with me. I can point you to resources from where you can start building knowledge. And design thinking typically takes some years to get it right. So it's not a quick fix. It's not a Selenium tutorial to quickly go through and you suddenly become a designer. So it is years and years of effort, and it's an ongoing effort. So have some patience when you're building frameworks. Other thing which you would observe here is that uh, you're able to simplify some of the identification information which you're able to provide. And Selenium by itself does not have the concept of contextual weighting. When you have, let's say, explicit weight concept, you typically go for, let's say, elements presence or clickability or visibility, or if it is an alert, was the alert visible or has it gone? Is the frame available or not? But so these are presence related or state related checks. But Selenium by itself does not have contextual weight built into it, which means that if you want to click on something, that click tells to the framework that if you want to click, it must be clickable, visible, and present. So when you build a framework, if you build contextual weighting into your framework, it would go a long way in reduction of code. Arjuna already implements this. So in case you want to use Arjuna, please go ahead. Otherwise, at least you have some sample code available before you, which you can refer and then pick some ideas from there, use it in your own work. Let's come to the next idea, which is in the previous slide, if you see, the identifiers are still hard-coded. So one of the basic things which you might want to do is externalize them into a file so that every time an identifier changes, you're not really changing Python code or Java code or Ruby code or C# code. You are just changing a text format file. It could be an XML, JSON, YAML, whatever format you're using. My professional suggestion to you is please do not use Excel. Please do not use binary format. I know you like Excel, you like spreadsheets, but the moment you go for a code versioning system, binary files do not get versioned. Please understand that. If it is a text format, you can clearly see the changes. If it is a binary format, you can just know that the binary file was changed, nothing else. The essence of framework building is you should precisely track what are the changes which are going in. And binary formats don't allow you for that. Please do not use binary format as far as possible. What you see on the screen is in Arjuna, I use YAML as the format, excellent format or good balance between text and not as complex as XML for human editing. One professional tip again for you from this slide is that please do not stop at externalization of identifiers. You can externalize metadata as well. You can externalize properties of elements as well. You can externalize if there is a nested element finding. So these kind of things, if you externalize, you would see a further reduction in your code. As I said on the previous slide, Arjuna has this. If you want to use Arjuna, go ahead, or at least look at its implementation, pick some ideas and try out in your code. But I must warn you, it takes a bit of design and effort. So if you're in for a quick framework building effort, you can stick to externalization of identifiers to begin with. And later on, you can work on the metadata externalization. I know it's a heavy presentation. Some of the presentations today are very entertaining, and I'm known for entertaining presentations. Today, I'm not here for entertainment. I'm here for your intellectual involvement. So I hope you spare me for this presentation. Let's stick to the facts. We are into bad test automation today in the testing world. Let's do effort in that direction. So no jokes today, no stories today. I'm short on time, so I would stick to the facts. Please bear with me. So let's do better. So once you have done the externalization, your code further reduces. As you can see on the screen, your code does not even talk of identifiers. So in case the ID changes to name or the value of ID itself changes or an XPath is involved or a CSS selector is involved, it doesn't change your code. And that should be one of your goals. You have to minimize. You can't stop change from happening. What we can do in our lives is, what is the impact of a change? Can we minimize the impact of a change? Because we are not calling for change. Change happens to us. Either we can shut down our eyes or accept the change and proceed. So in framework building, as architects of frameworks, please keep in mind, you have to pre-plan for what kind of changes could happen. And identifiers are the most common things which change in GUI automation. So plan for that well. Other problem which you see on the screen to be solved is that now we are picking the names and passwords from configuration using a magic function called C. One professional tip for Python programmers is that if you see on the screen, you might realize that I have hacked the dot operator. If you are into this, please be very, 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 very careful. I spent around 2 to 3 weeks just to make this dot work, and then it didn't work. It was creating more problems than solving it. So plan it well. If you're hacking operators in Python, please be very careful. Let's come to the next one, a problem which is least discussed in test automation world, which is localization. We just assume that our application is always going to be in English. We don't plan for Hindi, we don't plan for Tamil, Kannada, we don't plan for German, French. The problem is that some of the identifications of identifiers which you're using, they're text-based, especially when you're using link texts or when you're using XPaths. And there are other places where you want text to be entered, and that text has to change. There are other problems where a username might change. There are other problems where the street number, the address of a tenant might change for an application. So all addresses are not like Indian addresses. They have different structures. All phone numbers in the world are not like Indian phone numbers. They have a different structure. So how do you cater to that and then club that concept with the identification, externalization, and other stuff? So plan for localization. If you have the slightest hint that your application is going to be available and used in multiple languages, plan for localization early, because it is not patchwork. You would face a lot of difficulties at a later stage if you just want to beat localization into your framework. It has many challenges. Arjuna implements localization as a concept built into it. So you can refer the code. You can try out Arjuna, of course. It's a complex problem to solve, save your time. Or pick up the ideas, try in your own work. But please plan for localization. It's a challenging domain. And it took some time for me to plan for it properly. And once you've localized, of course, you can maybe use it in your identification or externalization files, or you could make code-based calls. This is another pattern which I would like to suggest to you, that whenever you plan for a feature or a value or data to be picked up from external sources, plan for two things, always. Whether it's configuration or referencing of data or data-driven testing or localization, you're planning for anything. Plan for something which can be referred textually, so that you can include it in text formats like XML or JSON or YAML for that matter. Also plan that how the same thing would be achieved in a coded format. And believe me when I say that to achieve both of these and in parallel and in a consistent way is tricky to design, but it would pay off very well in the long run, because whether you're using it in text format or code format, if the approach is similar, it reduces the learning overhead when it comes to users of your framework. And it again goes back to design thinking. I can't focus or highlight the importance of design. You know, whatever I say, if for 30 minutes I keep saying design is important, design is important, design is important, even then it would be less. Because as testers, what I've seen is that design is our weakest area when it comes to coding. So please spend some time. Those of you who are just users of frameworks, learn design early so that tomorrow you design better frameworks. Those of you who are designing frameworks today, implementing them, design is not an optional skill. Please spend time on that. And it is a time-consuming task, so be very, very patient when you learn. And can we do better? Most of you might have heard about page object model. And the truth about page object model is that it is very basic. Its discussion is very basic as we find it in texts and YouTube videos and first pages of Google search. My assessment of page object model tells me that it is insufficient for professional work. So it has to start as a basis. You must start abstracting your pages, but then you have to bundle those pages, portions of it, into higher level abstractions. So the model which Arjuna implements, it's actually grown beyond what is mentioned on the screen. It's called App Page Section Dialog Model. So your app is represented as an object. The application has pages. The pages have sections, and a page or the app might have dialogues. And all these are abstracted. So you can have a look at the code, pick some ideas from it. And of course, it has to be attached to the externalization of identifiers, which we discussed earlier. So you see a very significant code reduction suddenly, which is happening on the screen. And it starts talking in the language of end user. See, end user doesn't say, enter google.com in browser's address bar. End user doesn't talk like that. End user doesn't say, find an element by identifier and click it. No, end user doesn't talk like that. End user comes to your website to solve a problem. I go to Amazon to place an order or check the state of my order. I go to an email application to log in and then check my email, delete an email, yeah, reply to an email. I have a business purpose to solve, or I have a user end scenario to solve. I don't go there to say, find element by ID and then click on it. But most of the tests, when written using raw frameworks in Selenium, they speak this language in the test. They don't speak the language of end user. And then we market them or sell that test automation piece as that we automated an end user scenario. No, sir, no, ma'am, you didn't. You are selling raw code in the name of test automation. If the tests don't speak the language of end user, you are not doing end user test automation. Please keep this in mind. So these higher level abstractions would need some further things for you to plan them early. Again, like other things which I discussed, it would go a long way. And we can have lengthier discussions around this. It's all about ideas exchange. I have some ideas, and I'm sure you must also have got some ideas. Only if we converse with each other, which is the purpose of these conferences anyways, we get better at what we do. None of us is complete. We complete each other. So let's converse, let's talk, and become better over time. Let's come to the next concept. We have, some of you might have heard, setup, tear down, clean up, prerequisites, these kind of instructions. So the concept and this idea I've picked up from the underlying framework. Arjuna uses PyTest as the underlying framework. So I don't call them fixtures anymore. I call them test resources in Arjuna. So the idea is that whatever is the setup instruction or the tear down instruction or the clean up instruction for a test resource which you're making available to a test, it must co-reside. But in traditional frameworks, what has happened is that setup is in a separate function, tear down or cleanup is in a separate function, and sometimes one is missed or one is not called over the other. Or when you refer your code, it's not clear. There's no one-to-one correspondence between them. But if you put them in the body of a single block of code, it's very clear that whatever you set it up, basically you ate something. Did you clean your plate after that or not? Or did you just throw it on the table for somebody else to clean up? Somebody would have to clean up. If you don't clean up your plate of a test, then the system has to clean up. And that's where your crashes of your systems happen. Unstable automation happens. So the concept of test resource is something else which you might want to think over, but it is hugely governed by the underlying test engine which you're using. Apart from PyTest as the test engine, I have not heard or seen any other framework which implements this concept fully. So just see how you could design it or make right choices about test engines. Because it is not at your framework layer that you can take this decision. So it's a little deeper thought. And given the time constraint, I think 30 minutes is usually about 2-3 ideas. I have already pressurized you with maybe 6, 7, 8 ideas. So enough for today. One key message from this presentation is that we say, I'm building a Selenium-based test automation framework. Yes, please get started with that. 5-6 months later, please have an honest look at your framework. My assessment says that a Selenium-based framework does not have more than 10% Selenium code. 90% of your code is going to be non-Selenium. So in this whole buzzword, where this world of buzzwords, right? Selenium is the buzzword. Please don't fool yourselves. When you write a framework, most of your code is non-Selenium or non-Appium or non-rest assured. And that piece of code is where we go to Stack Overflow, we copy paste code, and we have like much redundant code around it. 85%, 90% is because we have Excel utils 1, we have Excel utils 2, we have Excel utils 3, we have Excel utils 4, because we don't focus on the skills or non-Selenium. So coding, design are the key skills. Selenium is just a library. It's just a set of commands and queries. Please don't hype it more than it deserves. If you focus on your coding skills, design skills, you would be able to work with Selenium. You would be able to work with any other tool or library or engine which comes in future as well, if the core knowledge is intact. That is one of the key messages for people who are starting into automation or people who are building frameworks. The message remains same. And the same message I carry with me. I've spent so far 18 years in this career, and this is the gist of what I've understood about being technical in the field of test automation. And please don't think that testing is different from test automation. When you do test automation, please do not, testing is the core thing which we do. Test automation is a way of doing it. So please do not forget the key goal. Use test automation to automate testing. Okay? Don't start differentiating between this. Don't draw those lines, please. And mark the date, 30th June, 3-4 days from now, Arjuna 1.1 production release is going to happen with support for HTTP automation. So possibly in my next presentations, I'm going to tackle the subject of HTTP automation a little deeper, as well as how to tackle data in frameworks. Final message, don't complicate easy stuff. Let it be easy, approachable. And the difficult stuff, the bespoke stuff, make it approachable. Don't make it too complicated. This is easier said than done from my experience. These are mutually conflicting goals, but keep these two goals in mind. Keep easy things easy and make complex things approachable. And you would suddenly start thinking about design in a much better way. And with that, I conclude my presentation. I knew it was fast, and I would like to answer any questions which you have to the best of my capacity. I hope I have some time left. Okay.
Rahul, yes, we have enough time. So if you would like to re-emphasize on some part of your presentation, you could do that, or maybe we could discuss more in detail while answering the question.
When I took, so Lalit, when I earlier took this presentation, it was like 1.5, 2 hours when I went through that mode. So I exceeded the time by much more. So today I'm happy, glad that I finished on time. So I would take questions to the capacity to which conference allows for the time. And then I would be available on Slack. And beyond Slack, I'm anyways available to have any conversations with any testers. Yeah.
All right. So let's start with the first question. Thalesh is asking, what could be the best alternative for Excel when using large data, CSV, XML, JSON, YAML?
See, Excel in itself is not a bad format, and Arjuna does support Excel for data-driven testing, for example. When you say large data, one of the things I'll suggest to you is that these words are not good for us. Okay, so what does large mean? Is 1 MB large for you? Is 100 MB large for you? Is 1 terabyte large for you? Yeah. So when we say large, it is contextual. For very large data, anyways, Excel won't support. So that's where you start going into the range of databases, right? Or MongoDBs for very large data. Yeah. Excel in general, I would say that avoid it as a format as far as possible because it's a binary format. And whatever data you can represent using Excel can be represented using XML, JSON, YAML. And you would find that in terms of integration, which is a deeply discussed concept these days in the world of CI and CD, these formats also help you in interaction in a much better. For example, if you choose JSON as a format, you pick up data from one in format of JSON, and then there's a second web service, let's say, running as a part of your framework. It can be sent as a REST call there and then consumed there. So you would find that your integration pieces, they start behaving very naturally. Otherwise, I have seen testers who read Excel, convert it to JSON, and then that JSON is sent to the next service, and then again converted to Excel and then dumped, and then read row by row. Okay, I have seen 10,000 readings of the same Excel file in a single framework. 10,000 readings. That's what we are doing in the name of frameworks. So the ideas which I'm discussing, it's not to see. One thing which I always say is, you're right. So whatever I'm saying is about some other people in some other room. Okay, that helps us in accepting a joke and a suggestion in a much better way. But I have rethought my approach. I used to use Excels. I have switched away from Excel some 10, 12 years back, and I'm a happy tester. So try it out. It would go a long way.
Excellent. Another question that's on the same lines that you're talking about. So how do you define a framework, Rahul? What are the objectives and the goals for creating one?
Okay.
You have another talk on that topic?
I, I have actually cracked jokes on this a lot of times. See, framework is the most abused word in our community. Everything is a framework. Even if we have static utility files, right, that we copy pasted from Stack Overflow, we have 10, 12 code files, we put it in a library, we start calling it a library first, and then we start calling it a framework. So framework in simple word is a way of doing things, right? Way of doing things. It is, so that's why we say framework of thought, framework of thinking, right? So framework is a way of doing things. So when we bring it to the concept of test automation framework, don't forget this fundamental fact that when you write a framework, you're designing something, you're creating something, it's your baby. You're going to define the way of doing test automation using this framework. So the concept behind this, I can give you a word, please search about it. It's called DSL. It's a very commonly used term in the agile world. DSL, domain specific language. So you're not just creating a framework, you're creating a way of doing things which is going to impact lot many testers than you. So focus on usability, focus on design. Design the, for example, I'll give you a simple example. Selenium's, when you go to a URL, it says get. You tell me any single user which says that I would get google.com. You tell me. Any user who says that. Or when a user has to enter text in username field, he says send keys. You see, this is an example of bad DSL which Selenium has. It has good parts also, but it's a bad DSL because it says it's an end user testing library or browser automation library, but it doesn't talk the language of browser. It starts getting techie in pieces, right? So when you design your framework, that .get call, you might want to wrap and call it go to URL or go to. That send keys thing, you might want to call it enter text. So you see, you're designing the language which people are going to use, how the tests are going to read. It's a way of doing things. It could be way of doing small things. It could be way of doing big things. So framework, from my perspective, is the word means this, nothing more than this.
Would it be safe to say that testability also makes a big difference when we are thinking about frameworks or automation frameworks, so to say?
Testability would have a huge impact because I test Arjuna also. I have to write unit tests and integration tests for Arjuna also. So the testability of the framework itself is a question. And the testability of the application has a huge impact on the way you're going to design your framework. So testability is the most, thanks for bringing this point actually, Lalit. It is the least discussed ability basically in the community. And it has a huge impact. And it's a 2010 GTAC when it happened, Google Test Automation Conference. The theme was testability. The theme itself was testability. And it's again a subject which doesn't come like automatically. It can't be patched. It has to be carefully thought about. And the moment you start seeing good testability, you would start seeing very natural testing happening at that level. So which would impact your manual testing or exploratory testing, whichever way we want to refer to it, and your test in the coded testing, as I call it, right? Your tests expressed as code. Both of these would get impacted hugely. And some of the testability features, of course, they lend themselves differently to test automation versus when a human is interacting with the software. So it's a deep concept and possibly a subject of a separate presentation.
Absolutely, I believe so. Thanks, Rahul. We have another question. So in what scenarios would you use JSON over YAML file?
Okay, so see, there's nothing fixed. So just so that you know, in Arjuna, I started with JSON as format. And then what I realized is that JSON is not really good for human editing. When it starts getting nested, people start making mistakes around curly braces and commas. There are a lot of human error, which those who are using it might have experienced. For simple structure, key value pairs, it's okay. But for complex structures, not meant for human editing. I switched to XML after that, which was recent, but it was bulky. Then I searched on a format which could be human friendly, but JSON-like. So that's where I found out HOCON, which HOCON. And for many years, actually 2-3 years, I continued using Qonf. And then what I found out was that even this had like limitations, and it was decent, good enough, but not really, not really to my taste. And this year, in fact, starting from February sometime, I have shifted to YAML and making extensive use of it. So my experience with text-based format is very good. Actually, XML wasn't bad. I would still like to use XML over Excel any time of the day, or JSON over Excel, or YAML over Excel. The key point is I like text formats because if there's a config file, if you have a code versioning system like GitHub, you can see the exact changes which are happening in which line. You can't see that with binary formats. Yeah, and they're lighter, they're integration friendly, and they don't have locking, which on Windows you would see around Excel files. These files locking starts happening when if multiple readers, or if the file is open and now a thread is trying to open it. So it gets rid of a lot of such problems also. It has good, very, very good side effects as well.
Thank you. So what is your, come on, people don't confuse me. So I will go with Sanjeev's question now. Are API automation cases more reliable than UI test cases? And does API automation provide better
At the
ROI?
end of the day, see, the first problem which I solved using Arjuna is web GUI automation, because world is after that. And the project for which I started building it needed that and called me for that. But given a choice, you can even get rid of GUI automation, in my opinion. Okay, it would save you a lot of energy and heartburns. Believe me, if you really want to do web UI automation, you're really, really into it, and you want to invest management and other things, confine it to 5-10%. Most of your effort should go into layers below GUI. Your running time, which you are targeting, right? Management asks you, they ask conflicting questions. They want GUI automation and less test automation time, running time. These are conflicting questions because GUI automation, you would keep maintaining of your whole life, first of all, right? And then they're extremely slow to run by 10s or 20s or 30 fold times. They are slower as compared to web service layer or even lower layer automation like at unit testing. So my professional suggestion, as far as possible, test the comprehend or all those test design techniques, combinatorics, apply at web service layer. At the UI layer, please stick to UI test automation. Okay, verify if errors are appearing in the correct form. Don't go for combinatorics or detailed or all combinations of testing at that layer. Stick to user story automation at GUI layer, confined to 30, 40, 50, 60, 100. So count should be in hundreds, not thousands when you're talking of GUI automation. A simple rule of thumb.
While we are at it, I will ask a follow-up question here on the same lines.
Yep.
So to minimize the cost involved with the GUI testing, would you recommend adding more functional visual checks on integration level also using APIs or maybe some mocking?
See, visual checks at API layer, not sure on that. Maybe there are frameworks which are supporting that. And
Integration.
maybe some level of static checking can be done around CSS, or whether the correct files are being picked up by the correct code. I haven't delved into that, but there are always possibilities. But visual testing is the area which should be done at UI layer, because that's where it renders itself. And what I would also suggest is that if you can, please club it with bit of accessibility. So you can always extract ARIA tags and check whether they appear correctly or not, right? You can, so make UI testing more than UI testing. Okay. For example, I'll tell you in Arjuna what is a recent feature. It would be available in next week. Is that when Selenium is running the tests using browser mob proxy, it also captures the network traffic. Okay. And then there are other possibilities which I'm working on that measure the basically performance, a bit of heuristic performance analysis of these requests. How do they go? And then maybe comparing from one run to another. So UI testing in itself is heavy. If you're anyways invested in that, try to make it more useful than just being a UI test. And then maybe it's worth the investment which you're doing on it. Yeah.
Cool. I will take the last question for the day and you could continue on the Slack channel. Abhishek, you asked 3 questions. I will pick first one. Does Arjuna support UI and API actions within same test?
Within same test, there is a concept which I would say it can't be supported, first of all, okay, directly. If you so I can discuss the idea with you. This is an idea which I came up with in Jan, Feb, and I'm going to work on this idea. Arjuna is in production, so it's not a research project anymore. So I had to sort of give in to the production needs and then develop it. So I can give you the idea that separate your GUI and your web service implementation of a test, because they're going to talk to different libraries, right? Web service would talk to web service module. Your GUI test would talk to GUI module. So anyways, the modules which get called are different. On top of that, what you can build is, I call it intent. Okay, intent. You can call it layer also. So what you can do is that you can build an abstraction called intent and then write your test based on intent rather than saying it's a GUI test or web service layer test. Okay.
Mhm.
The intent mediator should tie that when you say login, this intent when expressed as GUI versus API should tie this intent to GUI module or API module. And then your test can remain the same. And just by changing or configuring the intent or even data-driven way, your test would get bound to the GUI module or API module. If you do this, you need a converter, you need a transformer midway. Then your test can very well be the same test for both. Not something which I've implemented in Arjuna right now, but this is a very interesting and intriguing idea and keeps boggling my head also. The moment I have a right design in place, I'm going to implement it.
Cool. Thank you so much, Rahul. We will take a word of thanks right now, and I would urge all of you to continue this wonderful discussion on the Slack channel. Thank you so much, Rahul, for Arjuna. Thank you for presenting and sharing it with us, and
Thank
I
you so
wish
much.
you
Thanks.
success, Arjuna, and thank you for all your time. See you around. Bye.